Okay guys, so we're gonna get into this week's midweek breakdown, but before I do, I want you guys to know that since I missed last week, we're actually gonna get through chapters 45 all the way through chapter 55, because I want you guys to have all of the verses or chapter breakdowns before our party that's coming up, and our final challenge is to see who really wins the ski trip. So let me update you on the scores, and then we'll get in through chapters 45 through 55. And then we'll have one more midweek breakdown that'll go through 56 through 66. Anyway, we have God of Grace at 54 points. God is Good at 44 points. Felicia's So Cool at 42 points. And the Savior to Come at 56 points, still holding on to that first place lead by 2 points. Again, it's still anyone's game. If you do the studying, you'll get all of your paperwork back on Wednesday. And then do some studying and you'll have a great chance at winning this party in this free ski trip. So let me see if I can get my computer to work for me here. There we go. Okay, so we're going to start with chapter 45. So we see here in this chapter, God's main point being that he is God and there is no other God, right? He's not one of many gods. He is not like a little g small god or multiple gods, but he is the one, the only God. He created all things. He created and formed the earth. And this chapter hits over and over again over the sovereignty and the holiness of our God. He says, nothing compares. There is no one and no thing even in the same bracket to compare him. So he is so far uncomparable that you cannot compare something to him because there's nothing even at the level to make it a fair play to compare him to anything. And that's just what this chapter goes over. We serve the God who created it all, not with other gods, little g, and he is the one, the only, the set apart and the sovereign God. It is hit consistently through chapter 45. Then we get into chapter 46, and he continues about his power and his might, but he compares the difference, or he differentiates between the God of Israel and the gods or the idols of Babylon, showing the lifeless aspects of their idols, right? He's saying, like, you create them, you move them, you place them in their position, and then you worship them, and in return, you get nothing out of it. They cannot act. They do not react or do anything about what happens when they call upon you. But then he defers what he does, and he says, I am God. He has spoken and he will bring it to pass. He has purposed and he will do it, showing that he's alive, showing that he takes action. Then he states, to you who are far from righteousness, he will bring righteousness. That's talking about Jesus. He will bring salvation to Zion. So he's stating, I am alive. I am the God. I have righteousness, and I am going to bring righteousness to you who are far from it. Then we get into chapter 47, and we actually see a little bit of a transition here where he goes into the destruction or the coming destruction of Babylon. And how he states this is a humbling aspect. So he's saying, you remember how I gave you Israel and then you destroyed them, you were awful to them, and you thought to yourselves, I am, there is none besides me. Saying they thought of themselves as gods. They thought of themselves as something no one could touch, and that's how they mistreated everyone, saying, I am the best and nothing can happen to me. And he says, get ready, I'm coming. It will be in an instant, and you have no power to stop me. So he's just stating how little they are. He's humbling them back into a position, and he says, get ready because it's happening. And now we're going to get into chapter 48, and we see an explanation of why the nation of Israel was actually sent into exile. He's saying he told them from days past that this was going to happen, and then when it came to happen, he did it in a way to where they couldn't be like, well, the idols told him. And then he says, I'm doing something new that you know nothing about. That way you can't pretend like you already knew it was going to happen, talking about the salvation of Jesus. But what I want to read to you, the main thing in this is going to be verse 9 through 11, where it says, "For my name's sake I defer my anger. For the sake of my praise I restrain it for you, that I may not cut you off. Behold, I have refined you, but not as silver. I have tried you in the furnace of affliction. For my own sake I do it. For how should my name be profaned? My glory I will not give to another." So he's saying right here, the anger that I have, the lack of respect, right? This lack of yira, this lack of the fear of the Lord that you are portraying, I have deferred my anger for my sake, not for yours, but for me, because I will not have my name. I will not give my glory to another. So then we're going to get into chapter 49, and what we see now is this restoration that will come to Israel. This description that will come in the latter days is actually one of the reasons that the Jews of Jesus's day were looking for this king, this militant power, right? This idea of someone coming to destroy the reign that the people oppressing them had on them. And the thing that I want to point out in this chapter that we actually see, and what I kind of want us to get from this chapter, is they were not against a Messiah, but the Messiah they were looking for was a Messiah that fulfilled every single promise, even if the promises weren't said to come from the Messiah at the exact same time that the Messiah showed up. See, what they did was they took all of these promises and they made it into one big promise, and they're like, when he comes, all of this will happen immediately and I will see the end results immediately. But what happened was Jesus came as a lamb, right? He fulfilled multiple prophecies as we went over at the very beginning of this study, but he didn't come in the militant power, right? Even as we were talking on Wednesday night, we said he came on a donkey, humbly saying, I'm coming in peace. And then he sacrificed, and when he returns, he'll come on that white horse. And what we see here is all the promises that they put into one was fulfilled in the death of Jesus, but we don't see it come to pass until later on. And so what I want to point out here is when we are waiting on the promises of God, make sure you're keeping your eyes open for the movement of God rather than your own perception of what this promise should bring. Now, it's not saying that the promise won't happen. It's saying don't allow your perception to blind you from the promise being fulfilled before you, because it's not coming the way you thought it should come. Now we're going to get into chapter 50. So this is what we were going to go over. We went over last week. So some of these are a little bit shorter. I know I didn't read chapter 50 or chapter 51 to you, I don't think. But I read all the other chapters to you. So these ones are going to be a little bit shorter because we already went over the information, but I'm just going to reiterate what I said on Wednesday night when we went over this as well. So chapter 50 gets into a prophetic picture of Jesus, right? So we see this in chapter 50, and then we also see it in chapter 53, which I'm just going to read you the entire chapter as I did on Wednesday. It speaks for itself. It doesn't kind of speak for itself, it speaks for itself. But in chapter 50, it paints the picture of the obedient servant suffering for the sins of Israel, right? It says, I gave my back to those who strike me. I set my face to those who pulled out my beard. I hid not my face from disgrace. In spitting, knowing that he was vindicated, knowing that the Lord was with him, he suffered in obedience to the point of death for the sins of the world. This is pointing to Jesus. And again, I think it speaks for itself. There's not much to say there, but we're going to go into 51, where it actually transitions almost over to a chapter of reassurance, a chapter of the comfort that will come to Zion. He's saying, my righteousness draws near and my salvation has gone out. It's almost like he's putting in this chapter a message of, I'm on my way. Don't freak out. I'm coming. Don't start stressing, basically. He's saying, this is coming. I said it will happen. It's happening. Hold out hope, is how I read this chapter. Now we're going to get into chapter 52 here, if I can turn my page. And it says, this is what we went over on Wednesday, right? Share the gospel and be set apart, which we'll go into a little bit more once we hit our next study, which is going to be over the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But he states in this chapter, share the good news and no longer shall the unclean and uncircumcised stay in your city. And then he also states, touch no unclean thing. He's saying, you have been made clean, so be holy as your God is holy. Because you are no longer like the uncircumcised. You have a covenant. You are no longer like the unclean. You have been cleaned. So stay clean. Don't touch the unclean things. Be set apart as your God is set apart, right? Which gets us into chapter 53, but I'm actually going to start in chapter 52, verse 13, as I did on Wednesday. So it says, behold, my servant shall act wisely. He shall be high and lifted up, and shall be exalted. As many were astonished at you, his appearance was so marred beyond human semblance, and his form beyond that of the children of mankind. So shall he sprinkle many nations. Kings shall shut their mouths because of him. For that which has not been told them they see, and that which they had not heard they understand. Who has believed what he has heard from us? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hid their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. He was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray, we have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that is before the shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away, and as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living, stricken for the transgressions of my people. And they made his grave with the wicked, and with the rich in his death, although he had done no violence, and there was no deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him. He has put him to grief. When his soul makes an offering for guilt, he shall see his offspring. He shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hands. Out of the anguish of his soul, he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous. And he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with many. And he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul to death, and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sin of many and makes intercession for the transgressors. Like I said, I think that chapter 53 speaks for itself. There's not much you can add there. There's a lot there to really kind of sober you up in terms of this is what Jesus went through for us. I think reading through the gospel accounts of his death and crucifixion is also very good. And then there's some other statements that are good to just really understand exactly all that Jesus went through for us. But we're going to move on to chapter 54 here, which is talking about how our salvation is eternal. So we get through chapter 53 talking about what Jesus goes through for our salvation, and then we get to the eternal the eternity of our salvation, the eternity of our covenant with God, right? The covenant brought through Jesus is forever. Just like the rainbow is a sign of the promise to never flood the earth again, we can look at the cross and see the sign that his steadfast love and covenant of peace will remain forever. And like I did on Wednesday, I want to bring up, are you living up to your side of the eternal covenant? God saying he will consistently never take away his covenant of peace, and he will never take away his steadfast love. He has given us a sign like the sign of Noah. Are you living up to your side of this eternal covenant, where you know that God is going to love you no matter what, where his covenant of peace is going to consistently be with you, and in return you are to confess Jesus as your Lord, and you are to believe in your hearts that he was raised from the dead. Now I'm going to get into chapter 55, the last one of this week, and it goes over the compassion of God. So he says, come and drink, he who thirsts, come and eat, he who has nothing. Seek the Lord while he may be found. And that's the main part that I want to focus on, is going to be a reminder, don't live for the world while you are young. That's the biggest mistake that most people make, is they think, I have time. I'm going to do everything I can. I'm going to live out my high school years. I'm going to get through my college years. I'm going to party. And when I hit 30, then I'm going to give my life to Christ, because I know he's the way, but I want to make sure I have all the fun first. And what it's saying in chapter 55 is, seek the Lord while you have time, right? It says, seek the Lord while there's still time. Seek the Lord while he may be found is what it states here. And it's saying while he's here, while he can be found, that's when you go to him. That's when you seek him. Because you never know what tomorrow's going to bring. So why don't you come into the compassion of God while you can? And that is going to be our breakdown for this week and last week's chapters. And then next week I will give you 56 through 66, and it'll be our final midweek breakdown of the study of Isaiah. And then we'll get into our party, our Jeopardy game. Remember, points are very different during the party, meaning there's a chance for anyone to win. So make sure you're studying, make sure you're reading, using your resources, watching the videos if you need to go back to kind of remind yourself what did we go over, because it was a 12-week study, so I understand if you don't remember all that we have gone over. But I think that is all I have for you, so I will see you guys on Wednesday.